Begin today the Gemara on the Avav Amid Beis, the beginning of the second Perek of Masechta Horayos. Sagt Heilige Mishnah, Hoyre Kohen Mashiach la'atzmai. The Kohen Mashiach, which refers to the Kohen Gadol that's anointed with the oil that brings him on this level to be a Kohen Gadol. This was only up until a certain period in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash. Later on, they didn't use this Shemen HaMishcha, and the Kohen Gadol was only with Merubah Begadim. He had 8 garments as opposed to all the other Kohanim that have only 4. But this halacha that the Mishnah speaks about is only by the Kohen Gadol that's anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. So now, by Kohen Gadol, the Psukim in the end of Parshas Vayikra, it says that the carbon that he brings for an Aveda B'Shoigig is different than any other plain Yid. By the Kohen Mashiach, when does he bring a carbon? Only if Hoyre Kohen Mashiach la'atzmai, if he paskined and made a mistake regarding a halacha, let's say forbidden fats or halacha that you're chayev to bring a carbon chatas for, and that was shaygig, that was with a mistake, and the asa shaygig, and then as a result of his wrong psaktin, he also took action and was over on this iser b'shaygig. Then maybe par. He brings a par which is similar to the way it is by the par helam davish al tzibur when the bezdin paskin and the tzibur follow the bezdin that they bring a par. By a regular yid, when he does an aveda b'shaygig, the carbon that he brings is not a par. The carbon brought is either a kizba or a seira, a lamb or a goat, a nekeva. Here, though, he brings a carbon of a par similar to the way it is by the bezdin that paskin and made a mistake. Now, as you see over here, what the Mishnah is saying is that it has to be both of these details in order for him to be chayav the carbon. That he paskined wrong, and then he followed and did what he paskined wrong. If though it was a case, let's see the Mishnah continues. Shagag v'asa mezid. Shaygig that is. Shaygig v'asa mezid. If he made a mistake in his psakdin, but then afterwards, when it came to the action, he realized that he made a mistake, but he was still over. B'mezid, deliberately. Or the opposite, mezid, he knows, he realizes the mistake that he made, so it's not, the psakdin was not a mistake. He realizes that it's really something which is aser. But then, the aser shaygig, when it came to the action, he forgot the details of what he learned out on the subject, and he thought that this is a case which is allowed, and he did it b'shaygig. Then pater, will be pater. Because in order for him to be chayiv, it has to be both of these things. Right, so which means also that the regular kind of shaygig that could be by a person that's chayav a carbon, where he doesn't make any mistake in any psaktin at all. He just has a mistake in the action that he's doing. He thought that this is permitted fats, and it turns out to be forbidden fats. Ashkog and the maisa. That's not something that a kohen gadol is chayav to bring a carbon for at all. It's only in a case where he makes a mistake regarding the halacha, and then he follows through in fulfilling that b'shaygig, both details, then he's chayav the carbon. Shahirah's kohen Mashiach la'atzmai, because when a kohen gadol paskins for himself, koirah's bezin l'tzibur. We compare it to the halacha that we learned in the previous perek regarding bezin that paskins for a tzibur, and then the tzibur follows what the bezin said, that they bring a par. So too over here, in this case, he'll bring a par. That's the comparison. Okay.
So by bezdin, the sheikh is also butter?
Yes, I believe so. I think the Gemara is going to address this eventually. I think so, yes.
Good topic, because it sounds interesting.
Sagt the Gemara, it said in the Mishnah, shaygig v'asa shaygig. If he paskined with a shaygig, he didn't realize his mistake. And then also the action that he did was also a shaygig. So maybe par. Then he brings the par, this unique carbon, this par. In fact, the Gemara pshit, this is obvious that this is the case, that both were shaygig, that he brings a carbon. It's clearly in the psukim, and the Mishnah afterwards goes on to say if there was a shaygig and also a mezid, that's when he does not bring a carbon. But when both are a shaygig, that's obvious that he brings this special carbon of the par. Amar Abaye, so Abaye explains hacha b'mayaskinon. Here the chiddush of the Mishnah is in the following case: Kagayin shahayre, he paskined and made a mistake, and v'shachach me'ezet tam hayre, he forgot what was the reasoning for the psakdin that he said. And then at the time when he made the mistake to go ahead and do the action, Omar, he says to himself, I'm doing now based on what I paskined before. But he doesn't remember the reasoning of that mistake that he made. So the Ma'al in such a case, I would think to say, Kiv and the Ilu Misyad Dalei, if he would have remembered what the reasoning was, Shema Hadabei, he would have retracted of his actions, he would have realized now his mistake. So maybe I should say Kemezit Ami. In such a case, he should be considered to be like a Mezid. Why didn't he stop and think, wait a minute, what was the reasoning behind my Psaktin? And therefore should not be chayiv a carbon. Kamash Malan. That's what the Mishnah is saying. That if you paskin b'sheigig and he did b'sheigig, even if b'shas ma'is he doesn't remember the reasoning of his psaktin, he'll still be chayiv this carbon. Amazed v'asa sheigig chulu. But then the Mishnah says that if it's amazed when he paskin and the action he did was b'sheigig, or in the case of the opposite, he's going to be potter. Why? Because the Mishnah concluded because by the Kohen Gadol, it's the same like the halacha of the Bezdin, that paskin and the tzibur fulfilled or relied on the Bezdin. So the Gemara Mili, what's the source for this that we compared it to the Tana Rabbana? So we learned in the Braisa, we learned it out from what it says in the pasuk by the Kohen Mashiach, la'ashmas ha'om. In the beginning of the pasuk it says, V'im ha'kohen ha'mashiach yechta la'ashmas ha'om. So the simple pshat of the pasuk is that when the Kohen Gadol sins, this is something which it's a ashma. The whole nation suffers from this. But the Gemara is darshaning that we compare the Kohen Gadol sinning to a case where all Yidden sinned relying on the Bezdin. Harei Mashiach Ketzibur. When the Kohen Mashiach sins, it's like when the whole Tzibur sinned relying on the Bezdin. That's the source. The Braisa goes on to explain why do we need this pasuk. Why can't I just learn this out misvara? Sheyachel, I would think to say that I don't need this pasuk because v'haloi dinu. I can make the following comparison. Tzibur Moitza Meklal Yachid. The case of the tzibur that followed a bezdin is different than an individual that sinned. An individual that sinned b'sheigig, what's the carbon chatas? A kizba or a sira, a nekeva, a keves, kizba or a sira. By the tzibur, it's different. A tzibur, you bring a par helam davar shel tzibur. So we see that the tzibur is different than an individual. U'mashiach mutza mechlal yachid, and the kohen mashiach is also different than an individual. So I should compare them. Ma tzibur en chayovin el al helam davar shigas ma'isa. Just like regarding the tzibur, when do they bring a carbon? If there was a helam davar, the bezdin paskin and with a mistake, and the people followed also with a shegig shigas ma'isa. So avsh mashiach, so too by the kohen mashiach, I should compare and say lo yeh chayev el al helam davar shigas ma'isa. Only if there was a matter that was concealed, he made a mistake in a psaktin, and also the action was a mistake, then he should be chayev. So that's the comparison that I can understand without this extra words in the pasuk. So the Braisa goes on to say, or there's another way you can go and compare the Kohen Mashiach to another unique carbon that we find also on the end of Parshas Vayikra. Nasi. A Nasi, which is referring to a melech, a king, over all of Klal Yisrael, when he does an Aveda. So he's also Maitzah Mechlal Yachid. He's also taken out of the status of an individual that does an Aveda. Mashiach Maitzah Mechlal Yachid. And the Kohen Mashiach is different than an individual. So now Nasi, maybe B'shigas Ma'isa B'lei Helam Davar. The Nasi, his carbon is a different carbon. In what detail is the Nasi different than everyone else? The Nasi does not bring an akeva. The carbon that he brings is a sa'ir, a zachar. That's how the Nasi is different. But the Nasi, he's chayiv to bring his carbon chatas similar to the kind of shegig that it is by a regular yid that does an aveda. And that is maybe b'shigas ma'isa, he'll bring a carbon for a regular shgage on the action that he did, b'lei elam dava, even without first making a mistake in the psaktin. So I would say that Af Mashiach, maybe B'shigas Ma'isa B'lay Alam Davar. So the Kohen Mashiach, which is different than the Yachid, should be compared to the Nasi, that he should be chayav a carbon, even just with a mistake in the action that he did, without first making a mistake in the Psaktin. So I have two options who to compare the Kohen Mashiach to the Tzibor or to the Nasi. So the Braisa goes on to say, Nira L'midaime. Let's see to which one the Kohen Mashiach is more similar to. Tzibor, so on one hand I could say it's more similar to the carbon that the tzibor brings, because the tzibor is bepar, it brings a bull. Ve'ein, and it's one detail. And another detail, ve'ein mevi'in osham toli. The halacha of bringing a osham toli in a case where a person has a suffix, whether he did this aveda or not, by a tzibor there's no halacha of an osham toli. And what is going to learn it out? From this all from Sukkim it's learned out. On Mashiach, the Kohen Mashiach is also the same thing. Bepar, the carbon he brings is a par, and also ve'ein mevi osham toli. The Kohen Mashiach does not bring an Asham Tali. So therefore, I should compare and say, Matzeh ber nechayev el al helm dovim shegas ma'isa. Just like with the tzibur, it has to be both details. The mistake in the psak din, and then the action that was done as a result, af Mashiach lo yechayev el al helm dovim shegas ma'isa. So the Kohen Mashiach also should be both the mistake and then the action that he took. So that's the svara to compare to the tzibur. But the Brisa goes on to say, but there's actually a svara to compare the Kohen Mashiach to the Nasi. Oy klach l'derech zu. I can go to the opposite direction. Nasi maybe se'ira b'avedas kachavim. The Nasi, when he did an aveda b'shegig, but it was an aveda zara. What carbon does he bring? He brings a se'ira, a goat. It has to be in a keva, se'ira. Or maybe asham vadai. And he also brings a carbon asham, not the asham tolui when it's a suffix, but there are certain cases of ashamas that you bring for an aveda, which was a vadai. The carbon asham that you bring, let's say for me'ila, there's besides we say every morning, there's certain asham that you bring. So a nasi also brings this asham. Mashiach maybe se'ira b'avedas kachavim. The Kohen Mashiach, when he served avodah zarah b'sheigig, he brings the same carbon as the nasi, which is specifically a se'ira. Or maybe asham vadai, and he also brings an asham vadai like the nasi. So therefore I should compare them and say, ma nasi maybe b'shigigas ma'aseh, the nasi regarding a carbon chatos for every aveda. What's the kind of shegig that he brings the carbon for? Shigas ma'aseh, not with the hayra before, just the mistake that he made in his action. Af Mashiach maybe b'shigas ma'aseh. So I should say maybe to compare the Kohen Mashiach to the nasi that he brings with like a regular shegig just on the action itself. So we have these two options. So therefore, the Brisa concludes that's why he brought in the beginning the pasuk Talmud loymar la'ashmas ha'am, that by the Kohen Mashiach it says that when he sinned that it's like ashmas ha'am harei hu Mashiach ketzibur. The Kohen Mashiach is similar to the halacha of the tzibur. Ma tzibur and maybe el helm davar shigas ma'aseh has to be both the helm davar with the action. Af Mashiach and maybe el helm davar im shigas ma'aseh. He only brings a carbon when he paskened with a mistake and then he took action. That's the only time he's chayav the carbon chatas, which is a par, but otherwise he does not bring a carbon chatas. So it comes out the Kohen Mashiach is compared to the tzibur, but in a way it's even, Rashi points out in the Mishnah, it's more lenient than the tzibur. By the tzibur, if they did a regular shegeg without relying on the bezdin, they also bring a carbon, just a different carbon. They bring the kizba or the seira. When they relied on the bezdin, then they bring the par. By the Kohen Mashiach, the only carbon that he brings is in a case where there was both the helam davar and the maisa, and then he brings this carbon of the par. Okay, so now here the Brisa goes on to say,
what's called an aver if somebody does something b'shegig on Shabbos? Is any of these averes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if a person was machal Shabbos b'shegig and a maisa,
Yeah,
brings a carbon. It depends. It could be. It could be with the Helam Davar that the Bezdin Paskin. It could be not. It could be his own personal thing that he made a mistake. Shabbos is an example. One example. Yeah. Okay, so the Gemara now goes on to say, Eimeh or Ve'eimeh. If so, maybe I should say that I should compare the Kohen Mashiach when he sins, b'sheigig, to the Tzibor even a step further. And I should say as follows, Ma Tzibor, just like by the case of the Tzibor, Hoire v'asu achrav. When the Bezdin paskind, and the Bezdin themselves did not do Daveda b'sheigig, but the people, the Yidden, they were the ones that relied on the Bezdin. But they followed what the Bezdin said. Chayavin, they bring a carbon for this. Af Mashiach, maybe I should say by the Kohen Mashiach as well. When he paskind, and then other people followed and paskind what he did. You should be chayiv to bring a carbon for this as well. Talmud loymar. So for this, the pasuk here says by the Kohen Mashiach, the same pasuk, it continues vehikriv al chatasoi asher chata. He brings for his chet that he sinned, which means al mashachata who maybe he brings for this avera that he himself did, but they maybe al mashachatu acherim. This halacha, like it is by the bezdin that paskins that when the yidden sin that you bring a carbon for this, that does not apply over here. Here is the brayse. The Gemara explains one detail of this brayse. Omamar, the Tan in the brayse said before, Mashiach bepar, that the Kohen Mashiach he brings a par for the avera, and the ain maybe asham toli, but he does not bring an asham toli. Okay, so the fact that he brings a par, it says clearly in the pasuk. He brings par ben bakar l'tomim l'shem l'chatos. But this halacha that it says that he doesn't bring a asham toli, where do we know this? How do we know that an asham toli does not apply to a Kohen Mashiach? They may be Asham Taloi. So again, Minole they may be Asham Taloi. From where do we know that he doesn't bring this Asham Taloi? The answer is the Chsiv, because the pasuk says by the Asham Taloi v'chiper olav akayin al shigigosoi asher shogag, that the kayin will be mechaper for him for the shogig. It says it uses this term shigigosoi, his shogig asher shogag, that he made a mistake with this. What is this double lashon? It means misha chatasoi. It's only a person that his aveda and the mistake that he made is all one thing. It's all one point, which means that the person did the aveda and he forgot. He didn't realize what he's doing, and there that caused him to do this aveda. Right, so over here, this is the kind of person that would bring an Asham Toli. Yotza Mashiach, and therefore this excludes the Kaya Mashiach. She'ein shegigasai v'chatasei shaveh. Over here, by him, there's two different things. There's the psak din that he made a mistake, and then afterwards there's the action that he does. It's not just one shogig that the person made a mistake and did the aveda. There has to be first the psak din, and then afterwards the aveda. The chsiv la'ashma sa'am, like we just learned out, that by the Kaya Mashiach we compare to what it says la'ashma sa'am, just like by the case of the tzibor, it's the bezdin that first has to paskin, and then there's the action that the people take relying on the bezdin, similar by the kain. So since the kain does not fit into this lashon of the pasuk shigig gasa asher shagag, so therefore there's no asham toli for this. That's what the brayso means. So therefore, as the Gemara concludes, Hareu Mashiach kitzibor la'ashma sa'am. So the Kaya Mashiach is like the tzibor regarding this halach of ashma sa'am, like we darshan before. So there's no asham tali for him. But the Gemara asks, it can't be that this is what the brayso means. Why? Because you're saying that it comes out that the source that a Kaya Mashiach does not bring an asham taloi is based on the conclusion once we learn out from the pasuk la'ashma sa'am, comparing the Kayan Gadol, the Kaya Mashiach, to the But the question is, at this point in the brayso, it didn't yet conclude this. It didn't yet say that the Kaya Mashiach is compared to Ashma Sa'am. This is in the stage in the brayso where it's going back and forth, where it's just trying to understand this misvara. And it's saying, well, there's a possibility to compare the Kaya Mashiach to the Tzibor, and there's a possibility to compare to the Nasi. We don't yet have that drasha of Ashma Sa'am. So how can you say that it brings up the svara of Asham Toli, that he doesn't bring Asham Toli based on the conclusion of the brayso? So Ella, therefore the Gemara says, Asham Kidin Izba. When it brings here the fact that the Asham Toli, that the Kaya Mashiach does not bring Asham Toli, that's Derech Agav. It's not really supposed to be in this part of the brayso. Aliba de Emes, it's true that he doesn't bring the Asham Toli, but that's only after the brayso concludes this. L'chatchila though, the comparison that the brayso is making from the Kaya Mashiach to the Tzibor is only in the detail of the par, that they both bring a par. That's mafurish in the pasuk. But the Asham Toli is Kedin Izba. It's Derech Agav. Sagt Heilige Mishnah regarding this halacha of the Kaya Mashiach, Hayre b'fnei atzmai, if he paskin for himself, v'asa b'fnei atzmai, and then he also did an aveda for himself, miskap eloi b'fnei atzmai. He's going to have a kapara for himself with the carbon that he brings. Now the chiddush of this Mishnah, you understand from the continuation of the Mishnah, as Rashi says, we're talking about over here in a case where there was also a bezdin at the same time that paskin for Klal Yisrael with a mistake, and Klal Yisrael followed what the Bezdin said, and they have to bring their par helm davashal tzibur. So what the Mishnah is saying is that the Kaya Mashiach paskin and made a mistake and did his aveda, but the aveda that the Kohen Gadol paskin for himself and the aveda that the Bezdin paskin for Klal Yisrael were two different things. So therefore, the Kohen Gadol has to bring his own carbon, and the tzibur that the Bezdin paskin that they follow, the Bezdin have to bring their own carbon. However, if Hayre imat tzibor v'asa imat tzibor, if the halacha that the Kohen Gadol made a mistake in paskin for himself was the same aveda, was the same thing like the rest of the tzibor, like what Bezdin paskin for the rest of the tzibor, and v'asa imat tzibor, and the aveda that he was over on was the same thing like the rest of the tzibor. So then, then he's not going to have to bring his own carbon, that he's going to have a kapara together with the rest of the tzibor. She'ein bezdin chayavin at she'yoyru levat, and the reason is, so the Mishnah here, the way Rashi learns this Mishnah, it's giving a reason why I'm going to say that the Kohen Gadol in this case will be included in the kapara of the rest of the Yidden, because they're similar. Where do we see they're similar? She'ein bezdin chayavin at she'yoyru levatel miktzas l'kayim miktzas. The bezdin does not bring a carbon, as we learned in the previous Perek, unless it's a kind of psak din where they didn't abolish an entire mitzvah or an entire aveda. They were Mekayim. They said that there is, for example, there is Shabbos, but there's a certain detail that they were Mevatel. And v'chein Mashiach, the same applies to the Kohen Mashiach. A Kohen Mashiach, this unique halacha that he brings his own par, is only in a case where he was Mekayim Mikzas and Mevatel Mikzas. We see that he's compared to the Bezdin. Now, v'loi ba'avedas kechavim, similar regarding Avodah Zarah. Here the Mishnah brings up also that by Avodah Zarah as well, if the Bezdin paskin with a mistake that to be allowed to serve Avodah Zarah, it's only achi yoydu levatel mikzas or lekayim mikzas. It's only in a case where the Bezdin paskin that you could fulfill that the Avodah Zarah is a issa. It weren't mevatel the whole thing. And they said that there's a certain detail the Gemara explained before in the previous perek. For example, regarding ishtachava, what type of ishtachava. So they mevatel mikzas. That's when we say that you bring a carbon. Regarding the second detail of the Mishnah here, Avodah Zarah, it doesn't say v'chein hamashiach, that by the Kohen Mashiach the same thing will apply, because by the Kohen Mashiach he's not exactly included. It's not exactly the same thing. Okay, so the Gemara will address it later here on Amud Beis.
Is the same thing as the Vatul Test.
Yeah, regarding that detail.
What's the Veloy?
Again. And and you don't bring a carbon by Avodah Zarah unless it was Yoyrim Mikzas Mevatel Kayim Mikzas. That's how you read it. So the Gemara Minan Emili, from where do I see what it says here in the Mishnah regarding the halacha of the Kohen Gadol, that there's sometimes that he brings the carbon together with the rest of Klal Yisrael. The Tana Rabbanos will learn in the Braise, Hoyre imat tzibur v'asa imat tzibur. If what the Kohen Gadol paskin was this, the get together with the rest of the tzibur, the same mistake that the Bezdin made for everyone, and then he also did the Aveda together with everyone else. Yochel Yovi Parla Atzmoy, I would think that he has to bring a par for himself. Now, so the Brisa says, now this is a subject that we should be able to understand misvara. Videnu, I'll tell you misvara what the halach in this case should be. Nasi Meitzah Mechlal Yachid. We find that the Nasi, as we said before, the Nasi is the Melech, so he's different than an individual. U'Mashiach Meitzah Mechlal Yachid, and the Kohen Mashiach is different than an individual that brings the carbon. Ma Nasi, just like when it comes to the Melech, the Nasi Chata Bifnei Atzmai, when he sins himself, maybe Bifnei Atzmai, he brings his own carbon. Chata Matzibur, but if he sinned together with the rest of the Yidden, after Bezdin Paskin, and along with them he made the mistake following the Bezdin, Miskapalei Matzibur. So then he doesn't bring his own carbon, his kapara is going to be together with the rest of the Yidden. So Af Mashiach, so I should say the same regarding the Kohen Mashiach, that Chata Bifnei Atzmai, baby Bifnei Atzmai. If he paskin for himself a different Aveda, so then he brings his own carbon. But Chata Matzibur, but if the Bezdin Paskin and he followed together with the rest of the Tzibur, Miskapalei Matzibur. So then he should bring a carbon together with the rest of the tzibur. So I can understand the halacha of the Mishnah just misvara by comparing it to the Nasi. By the Nasi, it was pasha to the Gemara misvara. The Gemara doesn't even bring a source for this. So Rashi says it was pasha to the Gemara by the Nasi that the carbon of the Nasi, if he sinned together with the rest of the tzibur, that he brings a carbon together with everybody else. He's not different. But here, though, the Gemara says, no, you can't compare the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Mashiach, to the Nasi. Because, I'll say it's not the same thing. Because, why are we saying Misvara, that by a Nasi, that if he sins and he relies on the Bezdin together with everyone else, that he brings a carbon together with everyone else? The reason is, because by the Nasi, I see that on Yom Kippur, when you bring the carbon on Yom Kippur, there's the carbon that's brought as a kapara for all the Klal Yisrael, so the Nasi is included in that. There's no special carbon for the Nasi on Yom Kippur. Right, we learned about this in Masechta Shavuos. There's the carbon that's brought bifnim, which is a kapara for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav. That carbon is one carbon that the Nasi is included in. So we see that the Nasi is together with Klal Yisrael. Taima b'Mashiach, as opposed to when it comes to the Kohen Mashiach, she'em eskapalei matzibah b'yom kippurim. By the Kohen Gadol, he brings his own carbon for his own kapara on Yom Kippur. So since I see that he doesn't have the kapara on Yom Kippur with everyone else, so I would think that even in a case where the Aveda that he did, that he paskin, was the same like the rest of the tzibur, but still he should have to bring his own par, his own carbon. Talmud Loimar, so the pasuk says, Al chatasoi asher chata. When does he bring his own carbon? If it's his own sin, his own Aveda that he did for himself. So therefore, how do I explain this? When do I say that he brings for his own Aveda? And when do I say that we do compare him, that he brings together with Klal Yisrael? If the Kohen Gadol paskin for himself an Aveda that the rest of Klal Yisrael did not do, then maybe b'fnei atzmai, he brings his own carbon for himself. But if the Aveda that he did was together with the rest of the tzibur, then miskapalo ematzibur. Then the carbon that he brings will be together with the rest of the tzibur. That's the limud in the pasuk for this halacha of our Mishnah. Okay, but now the Gemara asks regarding the position of this Kohen Gadol. This Kohen Gadol that is paskening, so obviously if he's paskening, that means that he should be part of the Bezdin. That's paskening. So now if so, the question is, hey Chidami, what's the status of this Kohen Gadol that we're talking about in here in our Mishnah? If you're going to say, Duhu Mufla, he is the greatest, he's the wisest more than the rest of the Bezdin. And they are not as wise as him. So therefore, when the Kohen Gadol paskins, the rest of the Bezdin really has to rely on the Kohen Gadol. The rest of the Bezdin can't paskin without him. We learned in the previous Pedic, if a Bezdin makes a mistake and they're not waiting to hear the opinion of the wisest of the Bezdin, so then their psakdin doesn't matter. So if that's the case, pshita de miskapolei b'fnei atzmai, so then it should be pashit that the Kohen Gadol has to bring a kapara for his own psakdin that he made for himself and the mistake that he made for himself. Why? Because in such a case, the Bezdin that paskin and made this mistake, for the rest of Klal Yisrael, their psakdin is meaningless. The rest of Klal Yisrael, if they went and followed what the Bezdin said, this is not going to be in that case of them bringing the par helm davashal tzibur. They're going to have to just bring their own personal carbon chatas, which is a kizbay seira. Kol chad v'chad, every individual yid himself. Because in this case, the psakdin of the Bezdin, they did not include the mufla. This Kohen Gadol was not with them at all. On the other hand, if the Bezdin themselves, they're in a higher level, they're the wise ones that can paskin. And this Kohen Gadol is not as wise as them. So then the question is, so then why are we saying that the psak din of the Kohen Gadol has a significance that he paskin, and that after his psak din, he relied on his psak din? Why should he have to have a kapara for himself? If he does not have the ability to paskin, because it's the Bezdin that's wise, but he's not on that level at all, so then his psak din for himself is meaningless. He should have to go and advise with the Bezdin before he paskins. So why would we consider the psak din of the Kohen Gadol for himself to be significant that he should have to bring a carbon for this? Rav Papa explains, when is our Mishnah talking about? Kagoyin shahoyu muflaim shneim. They're both equally wise, they can both paskin for themselves, they're on the same level. There's the Bezdin that does not have to rely on the Kohen Gadol, and there's the Kohen Gadol that does not have to rely on the Bezdin. So it's in this case that we say that if the Kohen Gadol paskins for himself, he brings his own carbon, and the Klal Yisrael that follow the Bezdin that paskin for them brings their own carbon. Okay, now here, another detail where there's a machlokes regarding the case where the Kohen Gadol is paskining for himself and he brings his own carbon. So Abaye thought to say, what is our Mishnah speaking about? What does it mean that the Kohen Gadol paskined for himself and then he was over on the Aveda for himself? The Kohen Gadol and the Bezdin are in two different locations. And the Kamayru Betrei Isuri and the paskining regarding two different cases, two different Isurim altogether. There's no connection between them. So they have to be dafka in two different locations, completely separate things. But Rava says to Abaye, no, it's not. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be in different locations. Is it the fact that they're in different locations that separates that now the Kohen Gadol has to bring a carbon for himself? That's not what it is. Even if they're sitting in the same place. The kivin the kamayru betrei isuri, but they're paskening regarding two different isurim. Chet b'fnei atzmehu. What the Kohen Gadol paskind is one psak for himself, and what the Bezdin paskind is a different psak and a different isur, and they have to bring two separate karbanis. So the svara, as Mefarshim explain here, is Abaye thought to say that if the Bezdin is there and they see the mistake that the Kohen Gadol made, and the Bezdin is not protesting, the Bezdin is allowing his psak din. We just said they're on the same level, but they're listening to him and they're not protesting what he said. So then you can't consider what the Kohen Gadol paskin to be separate. The Bezdin is listening and they're sort of agreeing to him. So therefore he wouldn't have to bring a separate carbon. That's what Abaye held. But Rav said, no, the fact that the Bezdin is there and they're not protesting is not enough to say that they're not together. It's two different Isurim, it's two different karbanis. Okay, so now here the Gemara elaborates, what does it mean, two separate Isurim? Now, Pshite, this is going to be obvious that if it's hu b'chele v'heim b'avedis kechavim, if the Kohen Gadol is paskening regarding a case of forbidden fats that he said is mutter, and the Bezdin also made a mistake on a different isser because it was Avedah Zara. Chet b'fnei atzmehu. This is definitely considered to be two completely different Avedas. Why? Because the hachalukim b'tamayu, the reasoning of the psak din is completely different. There's different psukim. In other words, the source. There's the psukim in the Torah about chaylev, there's the psukim about Avedah Zara. And also the chalukim b'karbanis. They don't bring the same carbon. The Bezdin brings also a soir. by Avodah Zarah, on Avodah Zarah that is, you bring on additionally, besides the par, you have to bring a soyer as well, a goat as well. But for chaylev, for forbidden fats, you don't. As the Gemara points out, it's different karbanis, because the hube par. The mistake regarding the fats, that's only a par. But v'hein, the par v'soyer. The bezin regarding Avodah Zarah has to bring a par and a soyer. So then it's not the same. The hakamaisi hani soyer, the bezin brings a soyer as well. V'hulei maisi, and he doesn't bring it. So it's definitely completely two different avedas. The kol shekain, definitely it's obvious that it'll be separate, two different avedas. If the case is that hu b'avedas kechavim, when the Kohen Mashiach made a mistake regarding Avodah Zarah, v'heim b'chelev, and they, the bezdin, paskin them mistake in a different aveda regarding forbidden fats, the chalukim b'karbanisayim legamri. In such a case, their karbanis are totally different. Because in such a case, the Kohen Mashiach doesn't even bring a par at all. The Husi'ira, in such a case, the Kohen Mashiach brings a goat and a keva, and the Inu par, and they bring a par. Okay, so these cases are pashut, that is two different avedas. Ella, the shaila is, Hu b'chelev amachases hakerev. The Kohen Mashiach made a mistake regarding which forbidden fats, the forbidden fats that are on the kerev. It's one part in the stomach of the animal. And the hein, b'chelev shal hadakin. And the bezdin made a mistake regarding forbidden fats, which is al hadakin, in another section of the animal. So they're both chelev, but they're different chelev. Mahu, what's going to be the halacha in this case? Do I say mi amrina? Do I say alpha the carbon and shaveh? Over here, the carbon of both are going to be the same carbon of the pot. But given the mitrei kroikas, but since you learn it out from two different psukim, so pligin bitamayo. So they're divided in their source in the psukim, so it's separate. So the Kohen Mashiach brings his own carbon. I should say, Shem Chelev Echadu, the name of the Isser, which is forbidden fats, is one and the same thing, and therefore they'll bring the same carbon. So Rashi over here points out from what we learned before in the Mishnah and also in the previous Pedic that whenever there's a mistake of an Aveda, it has to be something where they're Mekayim Miktsas and Mevatl Miktsas. How do you have that possible regarding Chelev? Chelev is clear in the Pasuk. So Rashi says, because no, it's not so clear in the pasuk necessarily. Exactly the section, which section in the animal is the forbidden fat is not so clear in the pasuk. Or Rashi says the mistake could be regarding the shear of kazayis and less than a kazayis. That's something which is not mefurish in the pasuk. The Gemara goes on to say, if you're going to say that since it's all fats, forbidden fats, so therefore it's one name, one iser, so it's all the same. So what's if the case is hu b'chelev? He, the Kohen Mashiach, paskin regarding forbidden fats, v'heim bedam. They paskin regarding the iser of blood. They made a mistake on that. So what's the halacha here? Mi amrin b'tamayu hu pligin. The sources of blood and forbidden fats in the Torah is two completely different isurim, and therefore it's separate. Oy dilmar, I should say, kivin the shavim b'karben, basa karben is linan. But I should say that the carbon is the same. So I follow the carbon, which is equal and similar, the same that is. So the Kohen Mashiach is included in the par that the tzibur brings. So teiko, this remains unresolved. Going back to what it said in the Mishnah, she'ein bezn chayavin at sheyoyru levatl miktsas lekayim miktsas v'chulu, the halacha that applies by the bezn that made a mistake and the tzibur relied on them. It's only when they will mekayim some of the mitzvah and mevatl some of it. Minalan, what's the source for this? The at sheyoyru levatl miktsas lekayim miktsas. So the Gemara answers, we had this already before. We brought the source for this in the first Pedic. It's learned out from Venelam Davar. Davar Veloy Kolagov. Davar means a detail, but not the entire mitzvah. The Gemara there explained because you put the mem with the dalet. The Gemara explained this. There are a few sources there brought where you learn this out from. I compare and say the same as by the Kohen Mashiach. Minolam, from where do I know that I compare him to the tzibor? The chsiv la ashmas ha'am. Harei Mashiach kitzibor. The Kohen Mashiach is the same like the tzibor regarding this detail as well. And by Avodah Zarah as well, I say that it only applies if there were mevkayim miktsas and mevatl miktsas when bezin paskint. Minolan, how do I know that the same applies by Avodah Zarah? The Tana Rabbana. We learned in the Braisa, lefi sheyatz avedas kechavim lidem ba'atzma. Avodah Zarah has a halacha for itself. So why? Because Avodah Zarah there's a parsha for itself, and there you bring an additional carbon. You bring a sard as well. So mitzvah kula. So I would think that it's in a separate parsha, and over here you would be chayiv even if you uproot the entire mitzvah, the entire iser. So I say that no, nemar kan me'einei. It says over here the word me'einei. This is by Avodah Zarah. It says me'einei ha'eda. And it says also by the din of par helm davar shel tzibur, it also uses the same term me'enei eida. So in both cases, it's talking about where Bezdin, Paskin, and made a mistake. Now I also learn out, just like regarding all Isurim, it's only if it's a detail, not if you uproot the entire mitzvah, Afkanami by Vedizara as well, it's only if it's a davar, v'loy kolagov, only if it's a detail, and not if you uproot the entire Isser. Sagt der Heilige Mishneh, ein chayovin ela al helem davar im shiggas hamaisa. You're not chayiv to bring a carbon. This is the Mishnah here is actually continuing to point out all the details that the Kayim Mashiach is similar to the case of Hoyru Bezdin and the Tzibur follow. So before it said that the comparison is that it has to be only when they uprooted a detail and not the whole mitzvah. So here this is a second din that they're compared, that en chayav and elal helim davar im shiggas hamaisa, that the chiyuv of the carbon of the par is only if there was a wrong psak din together with the shiggas maisa, and v'chayin HaMashiach. So too by the Kayim Mashiach is only chayiv in this case. But then the Mishnah says v'loy ba'avodas kechavim, and also ba'avodas zara you're not en chayav, you will not be chayiv ela al helim davar im shiggas maisa, unless there was a helim of a mistake in the psak din, and then the action, the tzibur that followed what the Bezdin said. So again over here in this Mishnah, regarding Avodah Zarah, it does not say v'chein HaMashiach. So the Gemara will be medayik that as well. We'll see. So the Gemara Minalon. So where do I know this? That regarding the carbon that the tzibur brings, or regarding the carbon that the Kayim Mashiach brings, it has to be the mistake of the Bezdin, and then the tzibur follows. The Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Braise, Yishgu, it says in the Pasuk that they made a mistake. So the whole tzibur, that is, the whole tzibur made a mistake and did an Aveire. Yochel, I would think to say, the Yiyu and Al Shiggas Maisa, that even if the tzibur all made a mistake in the Maisa that they did, that they should all have to bring this par helam davar without the psak din of the Bezdin. Talmud Loima Yishgu v'nelam davar. It says both of these details, and that means ein chayavin el al helam davar im shiggas maisa. It has to be that the Bezdin paskin and made a mistake, and then all Klal Yisrael also b'sheigig went and relied on the Bezdin. That's when you're going to be chayiv. And v'chein HaMashiach, the same applies to the Kayim Mashiach. Minalim, from where do we know this? T'chsiv la'ashmas ha'am. By the Kayim Mashiach, it says that it is like ashmas ha'am. Arei Mashiach ketzibur, as we dashed before, that the Kayim Mashiach is like the rest of the tzibur. Now, v'loi ba'avodas kechavim ela al helam davim shiggas ma'aser. Regarding Avodah Zarah as well, the carbon will only be when there's the psak of the Bezdin and the Yidden that made the mistake. Minalim, what's the source for this? The Tana Rabbanan, it says in the Braise. Since by Avodah Zarah we see that there's a separate parsha, I would think that the tzibur is chayiv if they serve the Avodah Zarah just for the shgag on the maisa without the Bezdin making a mistake. So the answer is, like we brought before, the Gzeir Shaveh, Nemakan me'enei, it says over here by Avodah Zarah the term me'enei, V'nemala alon me'enei, by all Avedis. It says also me'enei, Ma'ala alon e'nei chayiv elal helm dovim shiggas maisa, by all Avedis. It's only when the Bezdin paskins and the people rely on the Bezdin, Afka by Avodah Zarah as well, En chayavan ela al helm dovar im shiggas maisa. Only if they relied on the Bezdin together with the Shkaga, then they'll be chayiv. Okay, but now the Gemara goes on to the lashon of the Mishnah, Ve'ilu Mashiach ba'avodas kechavim like a tani. The next part of the Mishnah, where it says regarding Avodah Zarah that you're only going to be chayiv with helam davar together with shiggas maisa, it doesn't say over there regarding Avodah Zarah that the same applies by the Kayim Mashiach. So Masnitan Mani, who's the Tana of our Mishnah that regarding this detail? By Avodah Zarah. By Avodah Zarah, we say that the Kayim Mashiach will be chayiv for serving Avodah Zarah even without a helam davar, just on a regular shgag on the action that he did. So who is this? Rebbe. Our Mishnah goes according to Rebbe. The Tanya, we learned the machlekes about this in a Braise. Mashiach ba'avodas kechavim. If the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Mashiach did serve the Avodah Zarah b'sheigeg, Rebbe Yomer b'shigegas ma'isa. The carbon that he brings will be even by a regular sheigeg in the action that he did. The Chachamim say behelim davar. No, it has to be that he first paskin and made a mistake that Avodah Zarah is allowed, and then the shgaga was based on that psak din. It's not just a regular shaking that he did. He made a mistake in the action that he did. He didn't realize this is Avodah Zarah. Okay, so we clearly see here this machlekes. Now, the Braise goes on to say, V'shavin, Rebbe and the Chachamim agree, Shebeseira, which carbon does the Kayim Mashiach bring? He doesn't bring a par. He brings a seira, a nekeva siyasar. And also V'shavin, another thing that they both agree is, She'ein maybe Asham Toli, that the Kayim Mashiach does not bring the Asham Toli. Okay, so therefore, the Gemara is saying the Mishnah that by Avodah Zarah, it did not say that the Kohen Mashiach is just like the Tzibor. So therefore, we know that the Mishnah is Rabbi. But the Gemara says there's no raya from the lashon of the Mishnah. But Tizbere, is this logical to say that your raya from the lashon of the Mishnah is correct? There's a Mishnah later where it says B'zedaynai kares u'b'shegagase chatos. There it says the rule b'chlal regarding what avedas there are carbon chatos. It says it has to be such a kind of aveda that b'mezid would be kares. So then b'shegag there's a chatos. Now, Mikatani, does it spell out there that this rule applies to the Kohen Mashiach as well? It doesn't spell it out clearly, but it's understood that it refers to the Kohen Mashiach as well without spelling it out. Ela, Tani, Ha, and Huadin Laha. The Mishnah starts off saying, here it says first, V'chein HaMashiach, regarding the first din that the Mishnah brings, it does spell out V'chein HaMashiach, that the same applies to the Kohen Mashiach. And even though it doesn't spell it out regarding the next detail, I say that it applies to that as well. So, Chanami, just like regarding the detail that it says that it has to be an aveda, which b'mezid you'd be chayiv kadis, that applies by a Kohen Mashiach as well, even though the Mishnah doesn't specify that clearly. The same over here, regarding Avodah Zarah, I could say that our Mishnah is the Chachamim, that by the Kohen Mashiach it's the same like the carbon by that the tzibur has to bring when the Bezdin paskins, that it has to be helam dava. Only if there was a psak din that he made a mistake. The Mishnah didn't spell it out clearly, but it applies to this as well. So there's no raya. Our Mishnah could be Rebbe, or our Mishnah could be Chachamim as well, even though the Mishnah doesn't specify it. Gemara brings the source. My time at the Rebbe. What's the Rebbe's source to say that by Avodah Zarah, the Kohen Mashiach is different, that he does not have to have any helam davar. He brings a carbon and a regular shgaga on the action that he did. On Makra, because the pasuk says by the carbon chatos v'chiper akayin ala nefesh hashegeges. This is by Avodah Zarah. The Kayin will atone for the nefesh hashegeges b'chata, b'shgaga. So these are extra words. Nefesh hashegeges b'chata, b'shgaga. What is it coming to teach? So the pasuk is coming to say hanefesh ze Mashiach. When it says there hanefesh, who's this extra word referring to? It's referring to the Kohen Mashiach. And when it says there hashegeges ze nasi, it's referring to the nasi. Bechata b'shgaga, and then when it says bechata b'shgaga, what does it mean? It's a Rebbe Sava. Rebbe interprets the pasuk to come and say that chet ze b'shgaga yehi. This aved of Avodah Zarah, you chayiv like a regular shegig, like everybody else, where the shegig is just on the action, not within a psak din before where you made a mistake. Just you made a mistake in the action that you're doing. That's by Avodah Zarah, both for the nasi and the Kohen Mashiach, different than the par hel and davishal tzibur. Rabbana say no, that's not how you interpret the pasuk. Mi shechatasai b'shgaga, only the one in the way that his chet he'll be chayiv for his shaygig, and by a Kohen Mashiach, that's only if there's a helam dover as well. Yatsa Mashiach she'en chatasei b'shgaga. So again, let me interpret this again. Mi shechatasei b'shgaga. Who is the pasuk referring to? Only to an individual that his chiyuv for the carbon is for a regular shaygig in the action. Yatsa Mashiach she'en chatasei b'shgaga. By the Kohen Mashiach, his aveda is not just in the shgaga in the action itself, ela behelam davar. It has to be a helam davar as well. So Adarabah, he's saying, Chachamim, that is, say that over here we exclude the Kohen Mashiach, because by the Kohen Mashiach we see that by him the Aveda is not just with a regular shegig. It has to be with a helam davar as well, even regarding Avodah Zarah as well. Now V'shaveh and the Braisa said that they both agree Shebesira Kiyachid, that which carbon does the Kohen Mashiach bring by Avodah Zarah? So the carbon is like a Yachid. Minalam, where do we know this? Dal Makra, because the pasuk says by Avodah Zarah, Vem nefesh achas, that if a soul sins, then what carbon do you bring? You bring the seirah. So this lashon nefesh achas means echad yachid, whether it's an individual, ve'echad nasi, whether it's the king, ve'echad Mashiach, whether the Kohen Mashiach, kulam b'chlal nefesh achas. This word nefesh achas means as long as it's an individual, doesn't matter what status this individual is, he's going to bring this seirah that the pasuk is talking about over here, as opposed to the tzibur. The tzibur doesn't fit into the word nefesh achas, and therefore they will bring the carbon par and a sar. But the Kohen Mashiach and the Nasi fits into the word nefesh achas, so therefore they bring the same carbon like the rest of like an individual, that is. Yeah.